My name is Jeff Hart. I'm Director of School and Trust Improvement Services with Best Practice Network, and I host these monthly webinars. So I'm delighted that Dr. Andy Hodgkinson is here tonight. He's one of our lead consultants, so he knows exactly what Best Practice Network's up to. He's been a head teacher, an executive head teacher. He's chair of the East Cheshire Head Teachers Group. He's also on the board of Outstanding Leaders Partnership, who work closely with Best Practice Network on some really outstanding practice. So I'd like to welcome Andy, and Andy's going to talk for a few minutes, and then I've prepared some questions to ask him. So welcome, Andy. Thanks very much.
So thanks, Jeff, and good evening, everyone. I really wanted to pick up on something in tonight's session that Peter Rubery talked about in the previous webinar last month, I think it was, particularly his reference to the work of Simon Sinek, Start With Why, and so you can see kind of the basis of that on your screens there, the notion that if you don't know it, every organisation, including schools, they know what they do. Some of them, they know how they do it, the things that make that organisation special. But not many organisations really know why they do it, and why is the purpose, the cause, the belief, the reason your organisation exists. And the reason I want to pick up on this in terms of school leadership is my belief that understanding purpose is a crucial concept in the light of the huge and rapid challenges of change that are taking place within the education sector at the moment. So I want to give you an example of this. Just try and move my screen forward. There we go. So if you think back to 2012, and you may be aware of the OECD's PISA comparison rankings. Well, they were published, the last ones were published in 2012. The latest ones, they're going to be published next week. And you can see them here. And they basically rank globally different countries' achievement in a global maths, reading and science test. And what I want you to notice there is the China territories and how they seem to do really well in these tests. And what I'm interested in about is what happens after these tests are published, and the levers, the things that take place as a kind of response of this comparison data being published. So if you go back to 2012 and you think about the publication of these tests, the UK actually appeared quite low down, near the middle, really, of the tests. And so the UK government responded to that. And in the UK at this time, Liz Truss, and some of you may know her from, I think she's the Justice Secretary now, she was a schools minister, and she responded to the UK's poor showing in these PISA tests by sending and leading a delegation out of ministers out to China to find out what the Chinese were doing in their curriculum to get such good results. And out of that fact-finding mission, the DFE, they came back and they funded, and some of you may be involved in this work now, the National Math Hubs projects, which are doing some really great work around the country in improving maths standards and teaching and learning for children. But what I'm interested in is not so much what happened in the UK, but what happened in China around the time of these publications in PISA. So, because just as Liz Truss was flying out to China to find out what was going on there, China was sending its own delegation back over to the UK to find out about our system of education. You know, now, on appearance, that might seem rather strange. Why would the country at the top of the league tables be looking at what those lower down were doing? Well, and this is where this notion of purpose, I think, is so integral. Because the answer lies in part with what was going on in the Chinese economy. In his book, World Class Learners, Yong Zhao outlines a number of points. Now, for those of you that don't know who Yong Zhao is, he's a professor of education He was born in China. He now works in a number of universities in both America and Australia. And he makes a couple of points. So first thing he wants people to note is that 20% of the global population live in China. Okay? Now, this 20% goes on to create 9% of the global gross domestic product. So that's the value of all the goods and services in a particular region. Okay? But what is most interesting, and this is what Yang Zhao points out in his work, is that out of that 20% of the population, only 1% of global patents are generated. So a global patent reflects the level of innovation and creativity in a region. So let's look at why this is actually really important when we're thinking about purpose in education. So some of you may have one of these. You'll definitely know someone that does have one of them, the iPhone. They currently retail here in the UK for about £600, okay? But what is interesting is if you look at the breakdown of the value of that iPhone to see who the winners and the losers are. So they retail for £600. So here we've got a breakdown of what's going on with the iPhone. If you look on the left of the screen, you can see that Apple, there's its employment structure, and you can see that Apple itself employs just over 60,000 people around the world, most of them working in America. And these people will be working on high-end, creative, technical work, design, and innovation. And then you can see a little bit lower down, there are then 700,000 people working in different companies, basically putting the component parts of the iPhone together. Okay? So you've got two types of real workers there. You've got the high-end, technical, innovative, and then you've got the functional, sticking the bits together. Okay? So then when this gets really interesting is when you look at the distribution of the value. And that's the value of that £600 that we spend on buying the phone. If you look at the kind of pie chart on the right, you can see that nearly 60% of that goes back to Apple in terms of profits. When you just look at the red bit, that's the bit that China gets, 2%. And that's where the majority of those 700,000 people work, sticking the bits together. It's low-skill, functional work. So you could look at this and say that the best education system in the world, according to PISA, is actually creating a very narrow economy. An economy that is functional, that does not generate high value. So Yang Zhao goes on to talk about how the Chinese education model, while good at getting people through the tests like PISA, is not necessarily good at creating creative thinkers who have the capacity to generate value in an economy. So in educational terms, you can see this happening. You have the rich set of inputs, which is the children of China. And that's where they start off. Multiple differences, multiple intelligences, full of curiosity, diversity, passion, creativity. And then they go through a schooling system. And that schooling system creates a set of people with a certain degree of employable skills. And you can see them there that they're quite narrow. And that is exactly why China was visiting education systems characterized by creativity, inquiry, innovation at the time when our ministers were exploring the Chinese models. You take America, for example, who was like the UK, it languished kind of mid-table in these PISA rankings, and you think of the kind of companies that come out of America. Amazon, Twitter, Facebook, we talked about Apple. you get some of the most innovative and valuable countries in the world. And this is where we come back to the notion of purpose. Because when you know why you're doing something, it drives the behaviours, the what and the how, if you think back to Sinek's model of what goes on in organisations. And I'm really interested in that what and the how. Because what I'd like to know, for example, in exploring this, is how the behaviours in a school possibly changed, for example, last February, when the Key Stage 2 exemplification details for the new summer tests were published. And I think lots of things happened quite quickly in a period of time in schools as a response to that happening. And I'm interested as to why they changed their behaviours. So you could see, that behaviours changed and then people did tests. Now, I don't want to kind of state that, in saying all these things, that we shouldn't ever assess children. Assessment, good assessment, lies at the heart of good teaching and learning. But what I'm suggesting is we need to be more clever about the way we think about what we're doing. So you take last year's assessment framework, our responses should be guided by our kind of moral purpose as educators, and we should be really reflecting how that impacts our behaviours in school. Picks up on something else here that Peter talked about last time. He talked about the whole education of a child and how it's important that we don't just educate children for academia, but we develop them in that rich set of skills and competencies that they have. Only last week, Ofsted published a report entitled Getting Ready for Work, in which it found, I think there were 40 schools that were inspected, only 1 in 10 of them adequately equipped their pupils for life after school. In fact, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, Yong Zhao defines the purpose of education as making sure that when his children grow up, they don't live with him when they're older. So that's why I think it is more important than ever that in times of such radical change, we as school leaders have a very clear definition of purpose. Now, I'm encouraged in this because it is something that is on our horizons. Nick Gibb, our schools minister, last year at the Education Reform Summit, he talked about the role education plays in developing economies, in shaping cultures, and in preparing children for adult life. You have the people like Michael Reese and John White, and they published this book a while ago now, talking about an aims-based curriculum and the need for embedding flourishing at the heart of purpose. So you can read on the screen there what their view is. The aim of curriculum is to enable children to lead a life that is personal and flourishing, and more importantly, to help others to do so too. If you think about what the media portrays on a daily basis at the moment, about the world, the state of our nation, it's so right that our education systems foster these kind of virtues that are so prevalent in many schools. Then coming back to PISA, just look at, for a minute, Singapore, another one of the high-performing countries in PISA. They have a set of 4 desired outcomes for their education policy, and these are those. See them on the screen? They want people to be confident, with a strong sense of right and wrong, adaptable, resilient, that knows themselves, self-aware, discerning in judgment, thinks independently, critical, and communicates effectively. They want self-directed learners who take responsibility for their own learning, who question, reflect, persevere in the pursuit of learning. An active contributor who is able to work effectively in teams, exercises initiative, takes calculated risks, is innovative, and strives for excellence. And really interesting, I think, in the light of some of the things that have been going on in our country since the summer, a concerned citizen. who is rooted to Singapore, has a strong civic consciousness, is informed, and takes an active role in bettering the lives of others around them. Just move this forward. There we go. So, last week I read an article in one of the national newspapers, and it recounted a conversation between George Osborne and Yuval Noah Harari. Well, we all know who George Osborne is, but Yuval, he's an academic and author who writes about history. You might know his most well-known book is entitled Sapiens, A History of the Human Race. And his recent book is entitled Homo Deus, A History of Tomorrow. And in the article you have these two people discussing each other's work. And in part of it, Yuval challenges George about artificial intelligence, and whether when he was Chancellor he ever considered the impact of artificial intelligence on the future of work, which could result in huge unemployment. Classically, George replies to this challenge, "No, I didn't have time to think in my job." And I thought about the world of a head teacher and a school leader at the moment, and how that phrase, "No, I don't have time to think," could be so true for them also. So I want to finish with two thoughts for you before we look at some questions. And the first is this quote from a chap called Eric Hoffer. He's an American sociologist. "In times of change, learners will inherit the earth, while the learned will find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists." And then with that in mind, and thinking around purpose, I want to leave you with these three questions. What are, for you and your school, the desired outcomes of education? What is the purpose of it? And then with those things in mind, what kinds of learning in your school with your students will deliver those outcomes? And then sitting below that, what kind of teaching will lead to that kind of learning that is needed? So that's the first part of the webinar. I think, Jeff, you might have some questions.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much, Andy. I was going to ask you, actually, because I think this week the TIMSS report's just come out, hasn't it, which is an international comparison. And, I mean, what do you think is the value of us spending time on these international comparisons, Andy?
Well, I think you have to have a nuanced response to things like this. And quite often, I think we do live in a world where speed is of the essence, and a response is needed yesterday. But coming back to the Maths Hub work with PISA, I got involved in the Maths Hubs, ironically, and it was around a time when I was thinking about life beyond levels. And at the time, I was asked by a teaching school to sit on its Maths Hub board, to think around how we could embed these Chinese systems or the Far Eastern systems within a UK context. And my initial response was, "You really want me to sit on this board to do this?" And that would have been a knee-jerk reaction, because I think what you have to do with these kind of reports is take time to learn from them, and also take what's in them and recognise that you have to apply it within your own context. You can't just take these things and transpose them directly into any given setting. I think you have the value lies in taking the learning and adapting that to your own situation. And so, coming back to the Maths Hub work now, I think I've been on a journey, and I've given space to learn from it. And I think some of the pedagogy that is in initial teacher training through the Maths Hubs, some of the training that's been rolled out for in my sector, the primary sector, is some of the most cutting edge professional development that some colleagues have been on. And so I think it's about your view of change, and it's whether you're going to learn from it or you just see it as another performance thing that you have to jump through a hoop.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's move on to some more general questions now, Andy, looking at primary issues. So what do you think are the three big challenges for primary schools today, and how can we resolve these?
Right, so I think the first one, and I think this faces everybody, is the challenge of finance. Not just the fact that we're in an age of austerity within the public sector, but I think we have change within the systems of how money's kind of comes through the pipeline. So the national formula, getting ready for that, increased costs through changes to the law in terms of pensions, talk about SEND funding reforms and early years reforms. I think that the whole world of finance is a massive issue that faces school leaders. I think a second one is particularly in the primary sector, more perhaps than the secondary sector, is thinking around structures. I think it was only earlier this week that Lord Nash was before the Select Committee and was talking about tipping point moment of the academised system, where in about 5 years' time the system won't be able to carry maintained and academies together, and there will be a move towards that. So I think that's another real challenge for primary schools especially. And then I think the other one, for me, is the accountability framework, and getting that balance right between ensuring that we do the right thing for children with a robust system of accountability, but one that is fit for purpose in terms of being responsive, that takes account of some of the hidden implications. I was talking to somebody in an HCI the other day, and they were talking about the impact of the current accountability system on initial teacher training and schools taking students, and then their view of their role in training those students and that dynamic there. And so I think how the accountability framework works is a third challenge. Now, in terms of how we resolve these, I mean, on one level, I wish I had a silver bullet but unfortunately I don't. But I think it comes back to the comment around that George Osborne gave, actually, about not having time to think. And I think in answering any one of those three issues, I think school leaders need to step up to the challenge and make sure that they are operating strategically. Because I think too often, because of the things that come through the pipeline, even just, if you open your email, you could get 500 emails at least a day. I think it's about making sure that you create space in your job to be strategic thinking rather than operation. And I think that's a real challenge.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. And just to focus a bit on the finance, so in this time of economic strain, what do you think schools can cut back on?
Well, first of all, I think what I would like to say is I really don't think there is enough value placed on education in the first place, and I don't think there's enough money perhaps coming in at the top end, but we all understand the reasons for that. But I think in thinking around how you get best value out of your school budget, I think it is really important to come back to, and it's why I actually chose to talk around purpose, I think, is that school leaders think about what their core purpose is, and that they remember that when they're making these kind of operational decisions or strategic decisions around budget management. And I think there are some kind of things that they can do. Work smarter. So you could look at the structural things, and actually maybe the structures challenge is as a part solution to some of the finance challenges. If you kind of work collaboratively, are there savings? But they're kind of like low-level things there. But even thinking about what you can do working smarter in your own organisation. I was talking to a colleague the other day. So the organisation I work with, we have a focus on growth mindsets at the moment, and we're going to do a project around supporting schools to explore that kind of methodology and culture. And he was talking about, where he's worked in London in the past, they embedded a growth mindset culture in the school, and not just kind of superficially. It was a hearts and minds thing. It was embedded right through the structure of the organisation, and they had initially they started with an SEND register of 40%, and they implemented this culture, and I think that the SEND register went down to 12%. So it might be about doing things differently as well. How you use what you've got to its best effect. Are you thinking about how you deploy your TAs? What resources do you have that are in or around your organisation that maybe don't cost you anything? There was an example in one of my old schools. We did a piece of curriculum design, and it was around enterprise, and it was about parental engagement. And we basically designed curriculum around the strengths of the parents. And so we were using that to kind of develop what became actually a think piece for the MPQH program around curriculum design. And so that came from a strain on budgets and actually ended up in something really powerful and creative.
Yeah. One
thing I would, and I just come to the one thing that I'm quite passionate about is I think the dangerous schools can cut back on their professional development budget, and I think if you need to protect one thing, you should try as best you can to protect that, and ensure that you are giving your staff the best professional learning opportunities that you can.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy. I think you've been an executive head, haven't you, in the past? And it's become sort of fashion, hasn't it, really? I just wonder what your thoughts are about executive headship.
Okay, so I think when I became a head of more than one school, and then that was the only experience I'd ever had of headship. And it was a federation at the time, and actually we were one of the first federations in the country. I think there were less than 100 schools working collaboratively in this model at the time. And, you know, the executive headship, even the name wasn't really embedded in any formal sense. Nobody, when I started it, knew really, in kind of robust, mature models, what that meant. For me now, talking about it today, you're right. I think only last week I was with the Best Practice Network licensee OLP, and we were talking about the reforming of the MPQ programs and what an executive leadership model might look like. For me, the fundamental with executive headship is appreciating the need to develop capacity in the schools that are in your organisation. The first thing that struck me when I became a head of more than one school was I'm not in my one school for more than half a year. And when you just take that on that level, you have to realise you have to do leadership differently. And so I made it a real priority, coming back to what I just said about professional learning, to ensure that not just one or two, but as many staff in my organisations as possible went through the leadership curriculum program. And so we put people through the MPQML, MPQSL, and the MPQH. And it was really integral to the moving forward of the organisation, was that building of leadership capacity at all levels. And so I think that would be the fundamental, if anyone's considering or thinking around taking on more than one school, is you really have to do your work on understanding the leadership capacity issues around that.
And from your sort of wide experience, Andy, what do you think helps drive up standards best in primary schools?
Okay, so I think it was Ken Robinson I think it was an RSA talk that he gave, where he talked about collaboration being the stuff of growth. And I think that holds true for schools and raising standards as well. I think, thinking back to the way our schools worked, it was through networking, it was through working with teaching schools and wider system leaders that brought those things in that we didn't necessarily have at the time in our organisation. I think that was really fundamental. I think collaboration is fundamental moving forward in the school system. And you can see that with the kind of maturing model of teaching schools and now with MATS. I think that space of collaboration is really important. Talking about specifics, I think fundamentally what drives up standards in the best primary schools? Getting the best staff. Teachers, more than anything else, I think, have the capacity to drive up a standard in a school. So you want people with strong subject knowledge that really know what they're doing about instruction in the classroom through their questioning, through their assessment, who generate a good classroom culture, the way they develop their relationships between the teacher and the pupils, manage the space, manage the behaviour, and who are committed themselves as learners. I think what helps drive up standards best in primary schools is probably a commitment to learning, and holding that. Everything you do is about learning, and again that comes back to the notion of purpose that I started this evening off with.
Yeah. There may be somebody listening to this webinar who's a head, struggling to deal with all the priorities. If you were with them, what advice would you give them, Andy?
I think first and foremost, again, it's why I considered the notion of purpose, is for them to be really resilient in protecting the reason why they do the job they do. Because let's face it, it will never get any easier. So really being strong on holding tight to your moral purpose of why you're doing this for the young people in your school. But then, having got back like the woolly thing, I think what you need to do is make sure that you get good people around you. On the MPQH programme, we're often asked at the start when we do some facilitation, what's your one tip of surviving as a head teacher? And and it sounds quite flippant, but actually I think there's a lot to it. I say, I always try and find people that can do it better than me and employ them. And I think within that, I think what you need to do is make sure that you never suffer in silence, that you get those people, those support networks around you. So, for example, in Cheshire East with ECAF, we have a commitment to making sure that all our new heads that take on a new post get a mentor, and we broker that between the organisation. We're currently looking at then how we can now take that kind of offer of support networks and build in a coaching model for all serving heads. Because I think the other thing I would say in this is engage in coaching. I think coaching is one of the most powerful things to support leaders in their role. And so if there's anything that someone is struggling with, never do it and pretend that you have to be big enough and strong enough to do it on your own. I think you need those support networks.
Mm. And there may be somebody else, Andy, listening, who's thinking, any day now inspectors will come to my school. So what advice would you give to a school awaiting inspection?
Okay. I'm quite passionate, as you might be able to see, about the notion of learning. And there's a chap called Chris Watkins. He wrote a research piece for the Institute of Education, and it was looking at the difference between learning organisations and performance organisations. And by that, he was talking about organisations whose behaviours are about meeting a certain performance indicator, or organisations that do things to try and learn and improve. So the research that he had showed that organisations that focus on performance may achieve a certain level of performance. It might be in the Ofsted criteria. But the research would show that those organisations that are brave enough to focus on learning, constantly improving for the sake of learning, they actually outperform the performance-orientated organisations. So for those waiting for inspection, it's having that notion that the things that you do are not done because of Ofsted. The things that you do is because you're always constantly trying to improve on things by learning. That's a culture. I think Peter talked last time about Simon Sinek and the why, how, and the what. And then he also added, and I thought that was a really clever thing to do, he included a fourth circle, which was who. And so I think for those preparing for inspection, they need to be really careful in considering how they are going to empower the middle leaders in the experience, how they're going to empower the senior leaders in the experience, and put the right people and empower them to take those places when the inspection comes, because I think that sends a powerful message to any inspection team.
And one thing they will focus on is safeguarding. And any advice about safeguarding, Andy?
And it's an interesting one, because I think the shift might be changing. In Cheshire East, for example, the local authority, we have a Skies team, and I'm presuming most local authorities will have a Skies team. Safeguarding still will remain a statutory duty of the local authority. So the first thing is I would definitely check, does your Skies team or your local safeguarding team, do they offer an audit? And get those done. They do those in Cheshire East, and they've been a fascinating learning experience for the schools that have taken part in it. But more interestingly, and I think this is where there's a bit of work to be done still, is how the safeguarding agenda takes into consideration the notion of mental health and well-being. I was at an HMI event a couple of weeks ago with a number of teaching schools, and someone asked me, the HMI that was presenting, about the place of mental health as a focus within the inspection. And I think that there's a bit more work to be done probably around that, but I think schools really should pay attention to the role that a child's mental health can have on outcomes in their kind of academic world, so to speak. So advice on safeguarding today, I would be saying really think carefully about what you're doing to support the mental health of the children in your school.
And do you want to describe the last great school you visited, Andy?
Okay, so in my current job, I have the fortune to sit on a couple of governing bodies, and I sit on one governing body of a school in Crewe. And this school is at the heart of quite a deprived area, quite a lot of deprivation. And it is a privilege to see, from the sense of being on the governing board there, that the commitment that this school has to raising aspiration, to delivering on social mobility in that place through its monitoring, its focus on getting the best for these children. And I think what's been really good, coming back to some of the other things I've talked about, is to look at the world, how that school has been committed to developing its teachers. And so the school has gone through quite a wide program of sending its staff on the MPQ programs that Best Practice runs in partnership with the Outstanding Leaders Partnership. So it is building capacity, and through that capacity building, that is having a direct outcome on school improvement, which is utterly based on raising those aspirations for children. So much so, actually, that it's also enabled the school to go through to develop quite a refined succession planning model, whereby it is almost growing its own future leaders. And so it's been a privilege to be part of that, and to see how schools where they engage in the leadership curriculum with people like Best Practice and OLP, it can have a massive outcome impact on the outcomes of the young people in those schools.
Okay, great, thanks. Anything else about BPN you want to just share with people?
I think I think it comes back to the leadership curriculum, and it was about, at the heart of that, it's kind of like a growth model. Well, whatever level you're on, it's about improving yourself as a leader, and that being linked to school improvement. And I think as the programs have gone on, there's been this development of the 360 analysis tool. So I know it's kind of come out of the kind of leadership curriculum, but how Best Practice has enabled schools to really refine that kind of self-evaluation of the people in it, i.e. the leaders and the teachers, and provide them with a kind of a robust, then matched professional learning kind of toolkit through the programs has been really powerful, I think, and it's having a real impact on improving outcomes for the young people in those schools. So I'm really supportive of that. And the way that it works in partnership with schools, it's not something that comes down and is top-down, driven down from the top. It very much is a school-led organisation, especially through the work of people like the Outstanding Leaders Partnership, which is literally a school-led system of developing leaders. So I'm quite impressed with the 360 and the commitment to developing school leaders. I would recommend that to anybody.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Andy. I think you've given us a really good presentation. You've dealt with all those issues really professionally, and we can just sense how enthusiastic and keen you are that children learn as best they can today. So thanks very much, and I'll hand over to Tim.
Okay, thank you very much. Jeff, there was a couple of questions. One of them was this, Andy. A number of schools in the UK focus on supporting children to learn resilience, resourcefulness, critical curiosity, reflectiveness, independence and interdependence, collaboration, etc. How useful are those, and is there time to teach these alongside the drive for higher academic standards?
Okay, so that's kind of building up the work, isn't it, of Guy Claxton? And I think it comes back to the thing that when I mentioned about the school that was delivering the growth mindset culture. And so how I would see those kind of issues of the learning to learn kind of toolbox approaches, it's how you deploy them. And I think the danger is you just pick up the latest fad and try and embed it in your school as quick as possible to get outcomes. So you think of the EEF toolkit, the Sutton Trust toolkit of interventions. So those, if you look at there, you can see that, I think, is it feedback and metacognition are some of those interventions that you can hope the research would suggest gives you the fastest level of progress if you do those things in school. And I think the danger is with them is people can think they can just impose them at carte blanche, and I think what schools have to consider is how they personalise all of those types of things and how they make it mature. So that's like it becomes a culture, and creating a culture is not something that happens overnight. And so all of those kind of things, fantastic things to embed in a school, but to appreciate that actually they're not something that is an add-on. I think it becomes the vehicle through which you achieve the great outcomes for children, rather than seeing them as something that you have to teach separately. Okay, so they're more like the vehicle, but that vehicle takes some time to develop.
Thank you. And the second question is, hello, I'm a deputy head working under an executive head in a federation of 2 small primary schools. In your honest opinion, Andy, as having been an executive head, would you recommend that would you recommend that is it best to take the first step into headship in one single school first, or to go for something like a head of a federation?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that. I mean, coming back to my journey, my grandparents were teachers, my parents were teachers, my brother's a teacher, and I vowed I'm never going to become a teacher, which is what I did actually for a while, and I didn't go straight into teaching. But that then resulted that when I was in teaching, my first headship was as an executive head. And I think a lot more is now known about what it means to be an executive head or work over a number of schools. Coming back to the work that I do with the Outstanding Leaders Partnership, one of the things that they do on the MPQH program is they do a readiness event. And it's a bit like being in the Dragon's Den. You get to do you're put in the place of a school leader, and you're given an Ofsted report, you're given a budget, and you have to work out what would you do. And it's been fascinating. When we first started doing that, the candidates that were on the program never really thought about working collaboratively or federating or forming a MAT or joining a MAT as a response to this situation. But it's becoming more of one of the first things that colleagues who may be deputies are appreciating. So I think, I mean, I've been with a colleague today who he's in a single structure school. and it's a really difficult context that he finds himself in. So I think, again, it's thinking you have to work out more what's right for you, rather than thinking about what's, is there a given way into headship. I think it's fascinating. If you ask heads, how did you become a head? There'd be 101 different answers.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you very much, Andy, for your time this evening, and thank you very much, Jeff, as well, for hosting it. Now, dates for your diary in front of you. We're going to be having these every month into the new year. So those are the next 3 that are set. So you might want to put those in your diary to make sure you get those. Just to say that we will be sending you a link to this recording, so you can look back and enjoy the feast that we've had this evening. And if you did want to have access to the Peter Rubery recording as well that Andy was referencing, then just drop us a line and we'll get that sent to you as well. So thank you very much, colleagues. We really have appreciated your time this evening. We thank you very much to Andy as well, and to Jeff also for hosting, and we wish you all a very good evening. Good night.